I know I'm not the only one who's seeing that we have seen just about every crisis that has happened in July and August 2025 once before. For some reason, the world is not doing a good job at learning its lesson, although history has shown us what happens when we ignore things like high tariffs or influenza. So in this video, I'll be talking about how we've seen these mistakes before, who got it right, who got it wrong, and all the lessons we can learn in between from my series Lessons for the World. And I'll be talking about it while I create this look. Okay, so the first lesson I would say is to agree on fair trade before a war breaks out and not after. So you've probably already heard that Trump imposed super high tariffs on like 90 different countries back in July, which of course pissed a lot of these countries off, and they began to retaliate, and the prices of everything went up. I don't know if you remember this, but this happened before in 1930 when President Hoover of the US raised tariffs on many different countries to like record high numbers, or just like super high numbers, including Canada, which was the US's like biggest trading partner at the time, and other countries like the UK, France, Germany, and they all retaliated and hit the US with tariffs themselves. And then global trade just completely fell apart, and US exports went from like 5.2 billion down to 1.7 billion. Okay, and then the Great Depression happened. So plenty of historians and experts are warning that like something similar could happen now, but you know, these warnings are unfortunately falling on deaf ears. And ideally, we would learn from this lesson before we break out into like an all-out war, or before, God forbid, like another major recession or something like the Great Depression happens, and we just find a way to agree on fair tariffs before anything crazy happens, which is what eventually happened after 1930, after the Great Depression, after World War II happened. 23 countries, including the hard-headed US, decided to put their egos aside and establish like fair trading policies. And they signed the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, and they committed to lowering tariffs and trade barriers. But here we are all over again, doing the same thing and not learning from history in the face of global mayhem. Okay, now moving on to lesson number 2, photo op peace deals do not necessarily guarantee peace. So a couple weeks ago, Trump, Zelensky, and Putin met in Istanbul for like a historic high-stake meeting to discuss like ending this war that's been going on. And they did this for the first time since the war started, I believe. And it was highly publicized. A lot of people are talking about it. And you know, for the sake of the people in these countries, I hope to God it does mean the end of the war. Now, many people are skeptical because the terms of the ceasefire are like kind of crazy. It's basically like Putin saying that Ukraine has to hand over Ukrainian territory to Russia in order for the war to stop. And you know, people are skeptical because like Trump was supposed to like put pressure on Putin, and he was going to do that by kind of like imposing sanctions, but he himself said that sanctions don't really work well with Russians or with Russia because they know how to avoid it pretty well. So people are kind of skeptical, and that's fair because we've seen this happen before in 1938 during the Munich Agreement, when like all these countries, including like Germany, Hitler, Mussolini, and like the French and UK prime ministers at the time, like they met back in Germany and they were like basically agreeing to add to hand over parts of Czechoslovakia to Germany, and that was just to kind of like bid peace with Germany and kind of like give them what they wanted so that there wouldn't be a war. And then the war happened. So like these like super highly publicized like photo op peace deals like generally or historically haven't worked before, right? Especially when there's like a power imbalance. Like, doesn't really matter like what these peace deals, you know, look like on like in the like in our eyes, like, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, it looks good, but is it really going to cause change? Probably not. But there are examples of peace agreements that have actually worked, like the Good Friday Agreement or the Belfast Agreement between the UK and Ireland. Now, that was signed in 1998, and a major difference between like this kind of agreement versus like the Munich Agreement, or like, you know, what we kind of saw with Putin and Zelensky in Istanbul, is that there was talk about like unity and basically allocating power or enforcing equality in power between the two nations. And this agreement actually did end decades of violence between the UK and Ireland. And the reason why it worked so well was because it basically gave people in Ireland the liberty to choose like what they want to do. Like if they wanted to stay with Ireland, right? Or if they want to remain in the UK. And it basically gave both governments and parties, like political parties in both Ireland and the UK, like power and a balance of power. And of course, like the people in the UK, and I'm sorry, the people in Ireland, they had right to choose what they want to do. And yeah, people are going to be happy with that. Like, it's very, very simple. So that worked really well for them. And this agreement is actually known to be like a really great example for other countries to follow. And it worked out great. But unfortunately, you know, deals like this that prioritize equality and like actual progression, you know, seldom, unfortunately, overpower like deals or like countries or governments that wish like that choose dominance over like peace, pretty much. And that's why we have like never-ending conflict, really. Okay, now this lesson is not as serious, but still also serious at the same time and very relevant to today, and that is teach your citizens media literacy. Okay, now recently there has been, actually this has been going on for a while, but it's resurfaced again, videos of like fake clips from The Simpsons showing that, or predicting that Donald Trump is gonna die, right? Now this has like went viral in like the US and in the UK, and a lot of people believe that like The Simpsons like predicts the future, right? Because like, I don't know, there have been episodes where it's like predicted you know, events that have happened now. So it's like, yeah, I get like where people are saying that, but that video that was circulating was actually not even produced by The Simpsons. Like, it was fake news, if you will. And people like were just going nuts over nothing and like kind of jumping to conclusions over like something that actually wasn't even made by The Simpsons. Now Americans have been getting fooled by the media since like the media existed. Like, I'm talking like 1835, the Great Moon Hoax, which is like was published in like an American newspaper called The Sun, and it basically told Americans that there are like these like bat-winged moon men, and Americans were super scared and they believed it. And yeah, they just kind of like fell into the trap of like whatever like the newspaper at the time, which was like basically their only media, was saying, and like it caused like mass hysteria and panicked over something that just wasn't true. Or even like radio dramas like War of the Worlds by Orson Welles that predicted that Martians were going to take over or like invade, and like people were like filling up churches and like literally even like fleeing their homes out of fear because they, you know, believed everything that they heard, and they believed that a Martian and alien invasion was going to happen. So are we surprised that people, you know, believed that this Simpsons video was real and that like Trump might kick the bucket? No, we're not, right? Like, let's be so for real. But you know, there are countries who are doing a good job in like kind of protecting their citizens from fake news, if you will, like Finland, for example, which teaches their citizens like media literacy in school. And that's why Finland is like considered to be one of the like, or their citizens are considered to be like really high in the fact-checking sport, I guess, or the most fact-check savvy in the world. And they've been, you know, kind of implementing these programs since 2014, and like clearly it's working, and definitely something that the US can learn from. All right, now the fourth and final lesson is to anticipate that pandemics can and will happen and be prepared for them. So this one is kind of obvious, but is it really though? So you've probably already heard that the H5N1 bird flu virus has spread in the US, and it's actually caused like millions, like I'm talking 169 million birds across the US to get, or like, you know, to at least be reduced to stop the spread of this disease. And it's really unfortunate. It's basically like a bird flu, and that number includes like birds who have actually died from this virus, right? So not just birds who have been culled, right? And these birds include like commercial poultry or just like random flock, like backyard flock across the US. Now this is actually a pretty positive reaction from the US government, or the USDA, the US Department of Agriculture. They have been kind of proactive in preventing like influenza outbreak by really investing in research and like getting a head start on vaccinations and stuff like that, so as to not see like another bird flu like pandemic, because like that's like pretty much the last thing that we would need. And they've been doing quite a good job in being proactive in that sense. They've also like compensated any farmers whose like flock or like wild stock has been affected by this, which I think is great. And I mean, I don't even really have to go far back to remind you like when we've seen this in history before, right? Like obviously COVID-19 changed the entire world, like literally affected the entire world and rocked it to its core. And it basically showed us what happens when countries are not prepared for like pandemic. And unfortunately, it's super tragic. And the world has been hit with like devastating diseases before, also not too long ago, like in 2003 when Taiwan was hit with SARS, which is not too different from COVID actually. And it really affected them. But Taiwan Taiwan learned their lesson, and they were super duper proactive in like preventing another major outbreak when COVID hit and when like that came around. And they were amongst the countries that had like the least fatalities because they had like state of the art or world class like quarantine systems and like basically tracing systems for like how they can trace the flu to like prevent outbreak or like to trace the disease basically. And it worked really well. And Taiwan, along with like Singapore, Vietnam, and South Korea, were amongst the countries that like followed the system. And like again, they had like the least fatalities. So they definitely learned their lesson. And it really seems like the world has kind of learned its lesson from COVID, because like hard not to, especially as something that like rocked the world in the way that it did. Like it didn't just affect like one or two countries or even like really big countries or anything like that. Like it stopped the whole world. I think that this is one lesson that we are learning from, especially like seeing how the US has been reacting to this like H5N1 flu, bird flu. And that is always kind of good to see like lessons being learned. Okay, well that is all that I have for you guys today. I am finishing up with some powder. I actually really like how my makeup turned out. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope you learned something. And this is kind of a new format, introducing like kind of new things or multiple things instead of just focusing on like one country. Let me know if you guys prefer this way over the other, if there's anything in particular that you would like me to talk about. And thank you all so much for watching. If you like this video, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And I will see you on the next one. And as always, all sources in the comments.